a British cabinet minister in the 1930s. I wanted to ask him what his view of the extreme right was, and he said, what do you mean people like Mosley? And I said, yes, and he said, well, they're essentially movements that are cut off from what I consider the right to be. And although mostly came from the inner aristocracy, of course. And he said they're essentially, when you go outside Parliament, when you go outside the structures of the British establishment, this is his thinking, you go into the working class, you go into the mass. And they never have any power. They can create a lot of force, but they never have come to power in our country. During the revolution, of a political sort that we had 400 years ago, the masses were energized just for a small moment, and then the dictatorship closed once the monarchy had been removed. And once the dictator's once dead son was put on in by the Army Council, they realised he was a fool and a weakling, tumbled down dead, and they got the monarchy back very quickly. Can I totally approve of that? These radical parliamentarians and Puritans and ideologues of faith realised there was no strong man to hold it together, so they immediately opened up to the old order again and said, we take you back, there'll be no recrimination, there'll be no show trials, the men who stood for the execution of one king stood to salute another one coming in. That was the elixir of Englishness, as Cowling regarded it, the ability to, even in very theoretical minds, even with very theoretical, intellectually proficient minds, to put that intellect on no account in moments of national strife, and to embrace the reasons which in a way are sometimes purely physiological and irrational, viewed in liberal, rational, humanist terms, where every decision that every person makes is based upon a rational calculation of utility, of outcome, the moral notion which is very consequent to liberal thinking now, philosophically and ethically, called consequentialism, whereby all that ever matters is the consequences of a particular action. The total reversal of the prior religious view that what matters is intention. If you run a child over and he didn't mean to, it's manslaughter, which is punished in most Western jurisdictions in a quite minor way. So that's sort of the working class mother of the child has been run over. Whereas if it can be proved intentionally to try to put his foot down because he's been writing on a blog how he disliked that child and this sort of thing, and there's intention there, then that is completely different and conceived as such. So if you have an intention that lies behind an action, from the religious view, everything is prior. And the more radical the religiosity, the more the meaning of life is determined before one even starts thinking about how one might agree or disagree with that. The liberal view, that you have heuristic way of looking at things, you make it up as you go along, that everything's relative in relation to everything else, that life is existential and not essential, is the opposite of what you believe. And so in a strange way you end up with very theoretical, very abstract ideas based upon empiricism, based upon deep historical knowledge of texts and analysis of the psychological motivations of individual politicians and clerics, most of whom no one's ever heard of. Now, Cowling died a couple of years ago. He got some major obituaries in the Times and in the Telegraph. A relic or a portent? He certainly, in my view, misunderstood the libertarians who'd largely taken over the Tory party in the post-war period. Although he would have analysed them quite correctly as extremist liberals of a different sort. He didn't quite realise that the ruthlessness and the ability to shape-shift and change positions, which have seen Michael Portillo morph from a allegedly right-wing Tory defence minister and hate figure of the left to Diane Abbott's best mate as they sit together on a bootleg television studio. This strange transformation that's occurred. Cowling would, part of them would actually be amazed by the extraordinary cynicism in such a move for a man who professed hard-edged, no-nonsense cynicism and a complete sort of spare, unshuffling attitude towards things. That's an interesting parallel. The cynicism of what intellectuals call ordinary people can often take the breath away from intellectual cynics. That's an interesting conceit. Just as intellectuals can change their positions so quickly in a way that would dazzle people who are not dominated by ideas. I remember I went to what was called a salon when I was 18, and I realised that people who call themselves intellectuals have their own class system. They talk about intellectuals and ordinary divided for them into those who live purely and only for the mind, and the rest. All groups have their inclusions and their exclusions, because you can't have discourse without it. All groups rely on ordering who's in the group, who's outside the group, and so on. So I think he misinterpreted the changes in the Conservative Party, which in some ways was his great hope. His great hope is the Conservative Party has no views. The Conservative Party just is. And therefore, in his way of looking at it, anyone can come to power with it. He'd be very displeased with me. He'd say, I know what he'd say. He'd say, you've been a fool, he said. You've been too honest. Honesty is never a good idea in politics. This is his view. He said you should have completely hidden what your actual views are. He said you've been mentally extreme as a politician and gone out to the fringes and this sort of thing. When you should have stayed inside and chiseled your way out. This is his way of looking at things. But the problem with that view, and this has happened to legions of Tory MPs and others, is in the old days they could have their little groups like the Monday Club and so on the right wing of the Tory party. Those groups don't even exist anymore. You would have the funny element that when Ian Smith became leader, and the party voted for him to be leader because he resembled the people who were members of the party and they wanted him. And then they realised he was sort of much sense of humour as this block of wood, and was sort of completely unelectable in mass terms. And there was a coup. All the politicians got together in the Commons, never mind the members, never mind the public, and they had a coup to get Howard in because he was just a bit freer with the media. And in a strange sort of way, that sort of palace coup is the sort of politics that Cowling lived and breathed. But I think he misunderstood the importance of mass society. I think in modernity and late modernity, he overestimated the corridors of power and the influence of tiny little microscopic elites and the divisions between them. I think possibly before 1924, and don't forget most of his books are written in the politics that precedes the modern world as we conceive it now. His way of looking at things was much more salient. But now I think increasingly it doesn't matter. I consider this country is ruled by one party that has three wings. And the Liberal Democrats are in the middle and swivel and provide the ideas for the other two blocks, although they can't get in except in terms of roles of another Libertarian way. And the blocks are class. The blocks are class-based. Centre-right, the south of England and the environs and the bourgeois class. Centre-left, the north of England, Scotland and Wales, the bigger cities, and so on. And they move around each other. But ideologically, all of these parties pushed together believe in 80%. They're all secularists, they're all humanists, they're all egalitarian to a degree, they're all in favour of membership of the EU, they're all in favour of multiculturalism, they're all in favour of multiracialism. You have multiculturalism because you have multiracialism, not the other way around, and so on. They're all in favour. As you go out towards the margins of the Labour Party, the view that the American domination of the consensus that exists, that becomes more rancid, that becomes more adversarial, and there are people who just drop away there. Now that is true. And there are other areas where that neat little model, because neat little models always break down in human affairs, but broadly speaking I think that's true, that we're ruled by one party with three wings. And I don't think he really grasped that. So, like all political thinkers and political philosophers, there's a sort of Wagnerian moment at the end, People who sat with him on power in South Down when he lost that seat in Northern Ireland at the Patriots of the Democratic Union, doesn't have a hegemonic party amongst the unionists in Northern Ireland, run a cavalry against him purely to defeat him, because they didn't like him, because he was an Englishman, and an outsider, and somebody who advocated fusion with the rest of Britain, where they wanted to devolve Protestant power inside Ulster. All these divisions that don't matter anything really to people over here, but so matter is absolutely crucial, and as Howell sat there, watching the votes, watching the fact that his whole political career was in a sense ending in defeat, he said that all political careers end in failure. And, of course, that is true. That is a conservative view, of course, metaphysically. Because, broadly speaking, with the exception of